Besides the offerings which have been already mentioned, there are many others in various parts of Greece presented by Croesus, as at Thebes in Boeotia, where there's a golden tripod dedicated by him to his Menian Apollo, at Ephesus, where the golden heifers and most of the columns are his gift, and at Delphi in the temple of Cronaia, where there's a huge shield in gold which he gave. All these offerings were still in existence in my day. Many others have perished, among them those which he dedicated at Banchidae in Milesia, equal in weight, as I'm informed, and in all respects like to those at Delphi. The Delphian presents and those sent to Amphiaraus came from his own private property, being the first fruits of the fortune which he inherited from his father. His other offerings came from the riches of an enemy who, before he mounted the throne, headed a party against him with the view of obtaining the crown of Lydia for Pantaleon. This Pantaleon was a son of Alyattes, but by a different mother from Croesus, for the mother of Croesus was a Carian woman, but the mother of Pantaleon an Ionian. When, by the appointment of his father, Croesus obtained the kingly dignity, he seized the man who had plotted against him and broke him upon the wheel. His property, which he had previously devoted to the service of the gods, Croesus applied in the way mentioned above. This is all I shall say about his offerings. Lydia, unlike most other countries, scarcely offers any wonders for the historian to describe except the gold dust which is washed down from the range of Tmolus. It has, however, one structure of enormous size, only inferior to the monuments of Egypt and Babylon. This is the tomb of Alyattes, the father of Croesus, the base of which is formed of immense blocks of stone, the rest being a vast mound of earth. It was raised by the joint labour of the tradesmen, handicraftsmen, and courtesans of Sardis, and had at the top 5 stone pillars which remained to my day, with inscriptions cut on them showing how much of the work was done by each class of workpeople. It appeared on measurement that the portion of the courtesans was the largest. The daughters of the common people in Lydia, one and all, pursue this traffic, wishing to collect money for their portions. They continue the practice till they marry, and are wont to contract themselves in marriage. The tomb is 6 stades and 2 plethra in circumference. Its breadth is 13 plethra. Close to the tomb is a large lake, which the Lydians say is never dry. They call it the Lake Gygia. The Lydians have very nearly the same customs as the Greeks, with the exception that these last do not prostitute their daughters. So far as we've any knowledge, they were the first nation to introduce the use of gold and silver coin, and the first who sold goods by retail. They claim also the invention of all the games which are common to them with the Greeks. These they declare that they invented about the time when they colonized Tyrrhenia, an event of which they give the following account. In the days of Attis, the son of Manes, there was great scarcity through the whole land of Lydia. For some time the Lydians bore the affliction patiently, but finding that it didn't pass away, they set to work to devise remedies for the evil. Various expedients were discovered by various persons, dice and knuckle-bones and ball, and all which games were invented except tables, the invention of which they don't claim as theirs. The plan adopted against the famine was to engage in games one day so entirely as not to feel any craving for food, and the next day to eat and abstain from games. In this way they passed 18 years. Still the affliction continued, and even became more grievous. So the king determined to divide the nation in half, and to make the 2 portions draw lots, the one to stay, the other to leave the land. He would continue to reign over those whose lot it should be to remain behind. The emigrants should have his son Tyrannus for their leader. The lot was cast, and they who had to emigrate went down to Smyrna and built themselves ships, in which, after they had put on board all needful stores, they sailed away in search of new homes and better sustenance. After sailing past many countries, they came to Umbria, where they built cities for themselves and fixed their residence. Their former name of Lydians they laid aside, and called themselves after the name of the king's son who led the colony, Tyrrhenians. Thus far I've been engaged in showing how the Lydians were brought under the Persian yoke. The course of my history now compels me to inquire who this Cyrus was by whom the Lydian Empire was destroyed, and by what means the Persians had become the lords paramount of Asia. And herein I shall follow those Persian authorities whose object it appears to be not to magnify the exploits of Cyrus, but to relate the simple truth. I know besides 3 ways in which the story of Cyrus is told, all differing from my own narrative. The Assyrians had held the empire of Upper Asia for the space of 520 years, when the Medes set the example of revolt from their authority. They took arms for the recovery of their freedom, and fought a battle with the Assyrians, in which they behaved with such gallantry as to shake off the yoke of servitude and to become a free people. Upon their success, the other nations also revolted and regained their independence. Thus the nations over that whole extent of country obtained the blessings of self-government, but they fell again under the sway of kings in the manner which I will now relate. There was a certain Mede named Diocles, son of Phraortes, a man of much wisdom, who had conceived the desire of obtaining to himself the sovereign power. In furtherance of his ambition, therefore, he formed and carried into execution the following scheme. As the Medes at that time dwelt in scattered villages without any central authority, and lawlessness in consequence prevailed throughout the land, Diocles, who was already a man of mark in his own village, applied himself with greater zeal and earnestness than ever before to the practice of justice among his fellows. It was his conviction that justice and injustice are engaged in perpetual war with one another. He therefore began this course of conduct, and presently the men of his village, observing his integrity, chose him to be the arbiter of all their disputes. Bent on obtaining the sovereign power, he showed himself an honest and an upright judge, and by these means gained such credit with his fellow citizens as to attract the attention of those who lived in the surrounding villages. They had long been suffering from unjust and oppressive judgments, so that when they heard of the singular uprightness of Diocles and of the equity of his decisions, they joyfully had recourse to him in the various quarrels and suits that arose, until at last they came to put confidence in no one else. The number of complaints brought before him continually increasing, as people learned more and more the fairness of his judgments, Diocles, feeling himself now all-important, announced that he did not intend any longer to hear causes, and appeared no more in the seat in which he had been accustomed to sit and administer justice. It didn't square with his interests, he said, to spend the whole day in regulating other men's affairs to the neglect of his own. Hereupon robbery and lawlessness broke out afresh, and prevailed through the country even more than heretofore. Wherefore the Medes assembled from all quarters, and held a consultation on the state of affairs. The speakers, as I think, were chiefly friends of Diocles. "We can't possibly," they said, "go on living in this country if things continue as they now are. Let us therefore set a king over us, that so the land may be well governed, and we ourselves may be able to attend to our own affairs, and not be forced to quit our country on account of anarchy." The assembly was persuaded by these arguments, and resolved to appoint a king. It followed to determine who should be chosen to the office. When this debate began, the claims of Diocles and his praises were at once in every mouth, so that presently all agreed that he should be king. Upon this he required a palace to be built for him, suitable to his rank, and a guard to be given him for his person. The Medes complied, and built him a strong and large palace on a spot which he himself pointed out, and likewise gave him liberty to choose himself a bodyguard from the whole nation. Thus settled upon the throne, he further required them to build a single great city, and, disregarding the petty towns in which they had formerly dwelt, make the new capital the object of their chief attention. The Medes were again obedient, and built the city now called Agbatana, the walls of which are of great size and strength, rising in circles one within the other. The plan of the place is that each of the walls should outtop the one beyond it by the battlements. The nature of the ground, which is a gentle hill, favours this arrangement in some degree, but it was mainly effected by art. The number of the circles is 7, the royal palace and the treasuries standing within the last. The circuit of the outer wall is very nearly the same with that of Athens. Of this wall the battlements are white, of the next black, of the third scarlet, of the fourth blue, of the fifth orange. All these are coloured with paint. The two last have their battlements coated respectively with silver and gold. All these fortifications Diocles caused to be raised for himself and his own palace. The people were required to build their buildings outside the circuit of the walls. When the town was finished, he proceeded to arrange the ceremonial. He allowed no one to have direct access to the person of the king, but made all communication pass through the hands of messengers, and forbade the king to be seen by his subjects. He also made it an offence for anyone whatsoever to laugh or spit in the royal presence. This ceremonial, of which he was the first inventor, Diocles established for his own security, fearing that his compeers, who were brought up together with him and were of as good family as he, and no whit inferior to him in manly qualities, if they saw him frequently, would be pained at the sight, and would therefore be likely to conspire against him. Whereas if they didn't see him, they would think him quite a different sort of being from themselves. After completing these arrangements and firmly settling himself upon the throne, Diocles continued to administer justice with the same strictness as before. Causes were stated in writing and sent in to the king, who passed his judgment upon the contents and transmitted his decisions to the parties concerned. Besides which he had spies and eavesdroppers in all parts of his dominions, and if he heard of any act of oppression, he sent for the guilty party and awarded him the punishment meet for his offence. Thus Diocles collected the Medes into a nation, and ruled over them alone. Now these are the tribes of which they consist: the Busai, the Peritachini, the Strucates, the Aridzanti, the Budii, and the Magi. Having reigned 53 years, Diocles was at his death succeeded by his son Phraortes. This prince, not satisfied with a dominion which did not extend beyond the single nation of the Medes, began by attacking the Persians, and marching an army into their country, brought them under the Median yoke before any other people. After this success, being now at the head of 2 nations, both of them powerful, he proceeded to conquer Asia, overrunning province after province. At last he engaged in war with the Assyrians, those Assyrians, I mean, to whom Nineveh belonged, who were formerly the lords of Asia. At present they stood alone by the revolt and desertion of their allies, yet still their internal condition was as flourishing as ever. Phraortes attacked them, but perished in the expedition with the greater part of his army, after having reigned over the Medes 22 years. On the death of Phraortes, his son Cyaxares ascended the throne. Of him it is reported that he was still more warlike than any of his ancestors, and that he was the first who gave organization to an Asiatic army, dividing the troops into companies and forming distinct bodies of the spearmen, the archers, and the cavalry, who, before his time, had been mingled in one mass and confused together. He it was who fought against the Lydians on the occasion when the day was changed suddenly into night, and who brought under his dominion the whole of Asia beyond the Halys. This prince, collecting together all the nations which owned his sway, marched against Nineveh, resolved to avenge his father, and cherishing a hope that he might succeed in taking the town. A battle was fought, in which the Assyrians suffered a defeat, and Cyaxares had already begun the siege of the place, when a numerous horde of Scyths, under their king Medaies, son of Protothies, burst into Asia in pursuit of the Cimmerians, whom they had driven out of Europe, and entered the Median territory. The distance from the Palace Myotis to the river Phasis and the Colchians is 30 days' journey for a lightly equipped traveller. From Colchis to cross into Media doesn't take long. There's only a single intervening nation, the Saspirians, passing whom you find yourself in Media. This, however, was not the road followed by the Scythians, who turned out of the straight course and took the upper route, which is much longer, keeping the Caucasus upon their right. The Scythians, having thus invaded Media, were opposed by the Medes, who gave them battle, but being defeated, lost their empire. The Scythians became masters of Asia. After this, they marched forward with the design of invading Egypt. When they had reached Palestine, however, Psammetichus, the Egyptian king, met them with gifts and prayers, and prevailed on them to advance no further. On their return, passing through Ascalon, a city of Syria, the greater part of them went their way without doing any damage, but some few who lagged behind pillaged the temple of celestial Aphrodite. I've inquired and find that the temple at Ascalon is the most ancient of all the temples to this goddess, for the one in Cyprus, as the Cyprians themselves admit, was built in imitation of it, and that in Cythera was erected by the Phoenicians, who belonged to this part of Syria. The Scythians who plundered the temple were punished by the goddess with the female sickness, which still attaches to their posterity. They themselves confess that they are afflicted with the disease for this reason, and travellers who visit Syria can see what sort of a disease it is. Those who suffer from it are called Enares. The dominion of the Scythians over Asia lasted 28 years, during which time their insolence and oppression spread ruin on every side. For besides the regular tribute, they exacted from the several nations additional imposts, which they fixed at pleasure. And further, they scoured the country and plundered every one of whatever they could. At length, Cyaxares and the Medes invited the greater part of them to a banquet and made them drunk with wine, after which they were all massacred. The Medes then recovered their empire and had the same extent of dominion as before. They took Nineveh, I will relate how in another history, and conquered all Assyria except the district of Babylonia. After this, Cyaxares died, having reigned over the Medes, if we include the time of the Scythian rule, 40 years. Astyages, the son of Cyaxares, succeeded to the throne. He had a daughter, who was named Mandane, concerning whom he had a wonderful dream. He dreamt that she urinated in such a quantity as not only to fill his capital, but to flood the whole of Asia. This vision he laid before such of the Magi as had the gift of interpreting dreams, who expounded its meaning to him in full, whereat he was greatly terrified. On this account, when his daughter was now of ripe age, he wouldn't give her in marriage to any of the Medes who were of suitable rank, lest the dream should be accomplished. But he married her to a Persian of good family indeed, but of a quiet temper, whom he looked on as much inferior to a Mede of even middle condition. Thus Cambyses, for so was the Persian called, wedded Mandane, and took her to his home. after which, in the very first year, Astyages saw another vision. He fancied that a vine grew from the privy parts of his daughter, and overshadowed the whole of Asia. After this dream, which he submitted also to the interpreters, he sent to Persia and fetched away Mandani, who was now with child, and wasn't far from her time. On her arrival, he set a watch over her, intending to destroy the child to which he should give birth. For the Magian interpreters had expounded the vision to foreshow that the offspring of his daughter would reign over Asia in his stead. To guard against this, Astyages, as soon as Cyrus was born, sent for Harpagus, a man of his own house and of the most faithful of the Medes, to whom he was wont to entrust all his affairs, and addressed him thus: "Harpagus, I beseech thee, neglect not the business with which I am about to charge thee. Neither betray thou the interests of thy lord for others' sake, lest thou bring destruction on thine own head at some future time. Take the child born of Mandani, my daughter, carry him with thee to thy home, and slay him there. Then bury him as thou wilt." "O king," replied the other, "never in time past did Harpagus disoblige thee in anything, and be sure that through all future time he will be careful in nothing to offend. If therefore it be thy will that this thing be done, it is for me to serve thee with all diligence." When Harpagus had thus answered, the child was given into his hands, clothed in the garb of death, and he hastened, weeping, to his home. There, on his arrival, he found his wife, to whom he told all that Astyages had said. "What then," said she, "is it now in thy heart to do?" "Not what Astyages requires," he answered. "No, he may be madder and more frantic still than he is now, but I will not be the man to work his will, or lend a helping hand to such a murder as this. Many things forbid my slaying him. In the first place, the boy is my own kith and kin, and next Astyages is old and has no son. If then when he dies the crown should go to his daughter, that daughter whose child he now wishes to slay by my hand, what remains for me but danger of the fearfullest kind? For my own safety indeed the child must die, but someone belonging to Astyages must take his life, not I or mine." So saying, he sent off a messenger to fetch a certain Mithridates, one of the herdsmen of Astyages, whose pasturages he knew to be the fittest for his purpose, lying as they did among mountains infested with wild beasts. This man was married to one of the king's female slaves, whose Median name was Spako, which is in Greek Kino, since in the Median tongue the word Spaka means a bitch. The mountains, on the skirts of which his cattle grazed, lie to the north of Ecbatana towards the Euxine. That part of Media which borders on the Saspirians is an elevated tract, very mountainous and covered with forests, while the rest of the Median territory is entirely level ground. On the arrival of the herdsman, who came at the hasty summons, Harpagus said to him, "Astyages requires thee to take this child and lay him in the wildest part of the hills, where he will be sure to die speedily. And he bade me tell thee that if thou dost not kill the boy, but anyhow allowest him to escape, he will put thee to the most painful of deaths. I myself am appointed to see the child exposed." The herdsman, on hearing this, took the child in his arms, and went back the way he had come, till he reached the folds. There, providentially, his wife, who had been expecting daily to be put to bed, had just, during the absence of her husband, been delivered of a child. Both the herdsman and his wife were uneasy on each other's account, the former fearful because his wife was so near her time, the woman alarmed because it was a new thing for her husband to be sent for by Harpagus. When therefore he came into the house upon his return, his wife, seeing him arrive so unexpectedly, was the first to speak, and begged to know why Harpagus had sent for him in such a hurry. "Wife," said he, "when I got to the town, I saw and heard such things as I would to heaven I had never seen. Such things as I would to heaven had never happened to our masters. Everyone was weeping in Harpagus's house. It quite frightened me, but I went in. The moment I stepped inside, what should I see but a baby, lying on the floor, panting and whimpering and all covered with gold, and wrapped in clothes of such beautiful colours. Harpagus saw me and directly ordered me to take the child in my arms and carry him off. And what was I to do with him, think you? Why, to lay him in the mountains where the wild beasts are most plentiful, and he told me it was the king himself that ordered it to be done, and he threatened me with such dreadful things if I failed. So I took the child up in my arms and carried him along. I thought it might be the son of one of the household slaves. I did wonder, certainly, to see the gold and the beautiful baby clothes, and I couldn't think why there was such a weeping in Harpagus's house. Well, very soon, as I came along, I got at the truth. They sent a servant with me to show me the way out of the town and to leave the baby in my hands, and he told me that the child's mother is the king's daughter, Mandani, and his father, Cambyses, the son of Cyrus, and that the king orders him to be killed. And look, here the child is." With this the herdsman uncovered the infant and showed him to his wife, who, when she saw him and observed how fine a child and how beautiful he was, burst into tears, and clinging to the knees of her husband, besought him on no account to expose the babe, to which he answered that it was not possible for him to do otherwise, as Harpagus would be sure to send persons to see and report to him, and he was to suffer a most cruel death if he disobeyed.